From across the lobby, near the corridor that led to the administrative wing, a young surgeon named Dr. Preston Walsh stood with two colleagues, all three of them in white coats with ID badges swinging, all three watching the exchange. Preston Walsh had graduated from Northwestern, came from a family with a building named after them at the University of Chicago, and had spent exactly enough time in medicine to develop the confidence of someone who had been told he was exceptional his entire life. Security actually called on her again, one of his colleagues murmured. Preston laughed quietly. Honestly, they should hire her. She's here more reliably than half the residents. The nurses nearby laughed. Two of them looked away. One of them, a young woman named Jamie who had only been at Meridian for 4 months, felt something twist in her chest and kept her eyes carefully on the floor. Margaret had gathered her things. She was standing now, slowly, the way people with bad knees stand when they've been sitting too long. She had her bag on her arm and her thermos in one hand, and she was looking at Sandra with an expression that contained no anger whatsoever, which somehow made everything worse. "I'm sorry to have caused any trouble," she said. "Please tell Dennis I said goodbye." She turned toward the automatic doors. The doors slid open, and Dr. Ethan Carter walked in. Margaret looked up. Her eyes met his, and she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in a very long time, something that made her go very still. His hands were shaking. There were tears on his face. He wasn't wiping them. He just stood there, in the middle of the most carefully orchestrated professional moment of Meridian Hospital's decade, with tears running openly down his face, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking for 25 years. "I finally found you," he whispered. And then, in front of every doctor and nurse and executive and patient and visitor in that lobby, Dr. Ethan Carter, one of the most celebrated heart surgeons in the world, slowly lowered himself to one knee. "My guardian angel," he said. The lobby of Meridian Private Hospital went so completely silent that you could hear the waterfall. No one inside that hospital had the slightest idea who that old woman really was. It had started the way most things in Margaret Collins's life started, quietly, without drama, with a simple decision to do what seemed obviously right. This was 25 years ago, nearly to the month, in a different Chicago winter. Margaret was 47 then, and she had been a widow for 3 years, since her husband Thomas had died of a stroke on an ordinary Tuesday morning while she was at work. She had 2 daughters still living at home. The older one, Claire, was 19, and the younger one, Rose, was 16. They lived in a small house in Bridgeport that Thomas had spent 9 years slowly fixing up, and Margaret worked as a seamstress and alteration specialist for a dry cleaner on Halsted Street that also served as her primary social universe. She was not wealthy. She had never been wealthy. But she was, in the way of people who grew up without much and had learned to make peace with that, genuinely comfortable in her own life. There was always food. There was always warmth. There was, most importantly, always a sense in the Collins household that the world was manageable if you treated people decently and kept your promises and didn't spend too much energy wishing for things you didn't have. She was sitting in the emergency waiting room of Cook County Hospital on a Thursday evening in February, 3 days after a pipe had burst in the basement and 2 days after she'd realized the repair was going to cost significantly more than she had immediately available, when a boy came in. He was maybe 16. He was tall and thin in the angular way of boys who have recently grown several inches without the accompanying weight to fill it out, and he was wearing a jacket that wasn't warm enough for February, and he was alone. Margaret noticed him the way she always noticed people, simply, without judgment. And then she went back to her book, and then she noticed that the boy was standing in the middle of the waiting room with an expression on his face that she recognized as the particular expression of someone who is trying very, very hard not to completely fall apart in public. She watched him approach the desk. She watched him speak to the triage nurse and saw the nurse point him toward the waiting area. She watched him find a chair across the room from her, against the wall, and sit down and put his hands on his knees and stare at the floor. After about 10 minutes, she moved to a chair closer to him. "Is it someone you love?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were red. "My mom," he said. "What happened?" They said she needs blood. A transfusion. They can't find anyone." His voice cracked on the last word and he pressed his mouth together hard, the way boys do when they're fighting against something they've been told their whole lives they're not supposed to show. "Her blood type is really rare. AB negative. They're trying to find donors but they said it could be." He stopped. Swallowed. "They said it could be ours." Margaret sat back in her chair. AB negative. She had AB negative blood. She had known this for years because Thomas had made her get a blood type card when she was pregnant with Claire, had insisted on it with the particular thoroughness of a man who read about these things. "What's your name?" she asked the boy. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan," she repeated. "I'm Margaret. And I think I might be able to help your mom." He stared at her. "What?" She had already stood up and was walking toward the desk. What followed was not dramatic, though it was important. A nurse confirmed her blood type. A doctor appeared, quickly, with the urgency that had been missing from the evening up to that point. Margaret was taken to a donation room, and she gave blood, and the blood went to a woman she had never met, and an hour later the color returned to that woman's face and the monitor stabilized and a doctor came out to tell Ethan that his mother was going to be okay. Margaret remembered that moment with perfect clarity, always. She remembered the way Ethan's entire body seemed to collapse inward and then expand again, like a building that had absorbed an impact and was discovering it was still standing. She remembered the sound he made, a single, involuntary sound, half laugh and half sob, and how he immediately covered his face with both hands. She sat beside him while he cried. She didn't say anything particularly wise or particularly poetic. She said, "Let it out, sweetheart. You've been carrying that all evening." And he did. He cried the way teenage boys cry when they finally let themselves, all at once, without defense, and Margaret sat beside him with her hand on his back and said nothing, and that was, she had always believed, the right thing to do. When it was over he was embarrassed. She waved it off. She went to the vending machine down the hall. She had a few dollars in her purse that she'd been saving for grocery money, and she bought him a hot chocolate and a package of crackers and she brought them back to him and sat down again. "You shouldn't spend your money on me," he said. "It's hot chocolate," she said. "Don't be silly," he told her, in the scattered way of someone who has just been through something terrifying and is slowly returning to normal, about himself. His name was Ethan Carter. He was 17. He lived on the north side with his mother, who was a schoolteacher. His father had left when Ethan was 9. He was a junior in high school and he wanted to be a doctor someday. He'd wanted that since he was 12, but some days it felt very far away and other days it felt impossible, and tonight was definitely one of the impossible feeling nights. The things that feel impossible tonight will be the things that feel inevitable later. Margaret told him. "You're going to be a doctor, Ethan. I don't have the slightest doubt." He looked at her, and she could tell he was trying to figure out if she was just saying that the way adults said things to teenagers, the comfortable reassuring nonsense. that adults produced without thinking. But there was something in the way she said it. Direct, certain, based on nothing more than a gut feeling she had about this particular boy. That was different, and he heard the difference. Later, she paid for his bus fare home. She had exact change in her coat pocket and she pressed it into his hand, and she told him to get some sleep, that his mother was going to be fine, that he had done everything right tonight. She walked him to the door. And then she went back inside, retrieved her own coat from the chair where she'd left it, said goodnight to the nurses, and went home. She did not leave her full name. There hadn't been a reason to. She hadn't helped him. Expecting anything in return, she hadn't, honestly, thought much about it at all. It was February and a boy's mother needed blood, and Margaret had the right blood type. The rest of it had simply been what you did when a frightened child was sitting alone in a waiting room. You sat beside him. You bought him hot chocolate if you could manage it. You told him the truth, which was that things were going to be okay. She went home and made sure her daughters were in bed, and then she sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet of the house and thought, as she often did in that particular hour, about Thomas. She thought about what he would have said if she'd told him about the evening. He would have said, "That sounds about right for you, Maggie." He would have smiled. That was Thomas. He had found her utterly predictable in her goodness, and he had loved her for it completely. She did not think about Ethan Carter again for a long time. She had her own life to manage. The years after Thomas died were not easy years. Margaret had expected that. She was not a person who expected the world to be easy, but the particular difficulty of raising two daughters alone while maintaining a house and a job and a sense of normalcy was something that required a constant output of energy that left very little remaining for anything else. Claire met a man named David Walsh while she was 22 and working as a receptionist downtown, and they married when she was 24, and Margaret liked David genuinely and without reservation, which was something she had not been fully prepared for, to like someone that much who had taken her daughter away. They moved to Evanston. They seemed happy. They called on Sundays. Then Claire got pregnant, and Margaret allowed herself a joy she hadn't felt in years. And then when Noah was born, small and red-faced and spectacularly loud, she held him in the hospital room and felt something shift back into place inside her that she hadn't realized had been displaced since Thomas died. And then, when Noah was 3, Claire and David were killed in a car accident on the interstate during an ice storm on a January evening, and Margaret's world rearranged itself again, permanently this time, into something she hadn't planned for and hadn't chosen and had no option but to accept. She brought Noah home. She didn't hesitate, not for a single moment. He was her grandson. He was 3 years old and he had just lost both his parents, and there was no one else. She moved his things into the small second bedroom where Rose used to sleep, and she hung his drawings on the refrigerator, and she read him the same 3 books every night because they were the only ones he would tolerate, and she learned his food preferences and his fears and his particular way of organizing his toys, and she raised him. Rose had moved to Seattle by then and had her own life and had offered, genuinely, to take Noah, and Margaret had said no thank you without blinking. Rose called every week and sometimes more, and she sent money when she had it, and she loved Noah with a fierce long-distance devotion, but they both understood without saying it that Noah belonged with Margaret. And Noah, as he grew, was remarkable. He was not a flashy child. He was thoughtful, quiet, intense in the way that some children are, with a focus that seemed slightly out of proportion to his age. He read constantly. He asked questions about everything. He watched nature documentaries with the absorbed concentration of a scientist, and he had, by the time he was 11, declared with complete certainty that he intended to be a heart surgeon. Margaret had not told him about Ethan Carter. She had, truthfully, barely thought about Ethan Carter in years. There were too many other things to think about. There was always too many other things. It was when Noah was 13 that the first problem appeared. He fainted during gym class on a Tuesday afternoon, and a frantic teacher called Margaret, and she took 3 buses to get to his school, and she arrived to find him sitting in the nurse's office, looking pale and frightened and trying to convince everyone he was fine. He was not fine. The cardiologist at Cook County confirmed this after 2 appointments and a series of tests. Noah had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the heart muscle was abnormally thick in a way that made it work too hard and could, in certain circumstances, cause sudden cardiac arrest. It was manageable. It was treatable. But it required medication and careful monitoring and, almost certainly at some point, surgical intervention. Margaret sat in the cardiologist's office and listened to all of this and asked all the appropriate questions in a calm and focused voice, and then she took Noah home on the bus and made dinner and helped him with his homework and waited until he was asleep before she sat at the kitchen table and allowed herself to feel, in the quiet of the house, how frightened she was. She was terrified. She would not have admitted that to anyone, because in Margaret's experience, admitting that you were terrified was the first step toward being unable to function, and she could not afford to be unable to function. Noah needed her. So she was terrified in private, for exactly as long as it took, and then she put it away and figured out what needed to be done next. What needed to be done, it turned out, was expensive. His medication alone was a significant monthly cost, and the specialist visits, and the echocardiograms every 6 months, and the occasional emergency room visit when his symptoms flared. Margaret's pension was enough to live on, barely, and she picked up sewing work wherever she could, alterations, hemming, the occasional custom order for people in the neighborhood who had always trusted her work. She managed. She had always managed. She did not tell Noah how tight things were. She told him they were fine, that money wasn't something he needed to worry about, that his only job was to focus on school and getting better and making sure he ate the things the nutritionist recommended and got the sleep the cardiologist recommended. She said this consistently and cheerfully, and she believed he mostly believed her. She was less certain he believed her the morning he came into the kitchen at 6 a.m. and found her at the table going through a pile of papers with the expression she tried not to let anyone see, the expression that was about calculations, about which bills could wait and which absolutely couldn't, and what was in the account and what wasn't. He was 15 by then. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the counter, watching her, and she looked up and immediately arranged her face into its usual expression. "Morning, baby," she said. "Grandma," he said quietly, "are we okay?" "We're wonderful," she said. "I'm just going through some paperwork." "Sit down, I'll make you eggs." He sat down, but he didn't stop watching her. He had his father's eyes, careful, observant, the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. "I could get a job," he said. "A few of the guys at school work weekends at." "You're not getting a job," she said firmly. "Your only job is school and your health. Period." "Eggs or oatmeal?" "Eggs," he said, after a moment. "Please." She made eggs. She made them exactly the way he liked, scrambled soft with a little bit of cheese, and she put them in front of him with toast and a glass of orange juice. And she sat across from him with her coffee, and they talked about his history test and the basketball game at school and whether the winter was ever going to actually end. And she did not look at the pile of papers on the table, and he did not mention them again. But that night she went through the box in the top of her closet where she kept what she thought of as the remnants, the things Thomas had given her over the years. That had value beyond sentiment. A strand of pearls. A gold bracelet. An old pocket watch that had belonged to Thomas's father. She laid them out on the bed and looked at them for a long time. She sold the pearls the following week. The bracelet 2 weeks after that. She put the pocket watch back in the box because she couldn't bring herself to let it go, not yet. And told herself she would when she needed to. She needed to, as it turned out, sooner than she expected. Meridian Hospital was not where Noah had been treated originally. His cardiologist at Cook County had been following his case for 2 years when the situation changed. When a scan in October showed that the thickening had progressed more quickly than hoped, and the cardiologist referred Noah to Dr. Anita Pullman at Meridian, who was one of the best pediatric cardiac specialists in Chicago and who had access to a surgical team that Noah might need very soon. So Margaret began making the journey to Meridian on the days Noah had appointments, and on the days he had treatment, she waited. The journey took 90 minutes each way by bus, because she didn't drive and couldn't afford taxis regularly. She always brought her book and her thermos, and she arrived early and she waited in the lobby, which was beautiful and warm, and where, she discovered on the second visit, she was not particularly welcome. She noticed the glances on the first visit. On the second, a security guard asked her what she was doing there. She explained, pleasantly, and he went away. On the third, a nurse at the desk suggested that perhaps she would be more comfortable in the family waiting area on the second floor. Margaret had made it up there once, had found the chairs genuinely too hard on her hip, and had come back down, and the nurse had pressed her lips together in a way that said quite clearly that this was not the answer she was looking for. By the 6th or 7th visit, she had developed a kind of routine of daily mild humiliation that she endured with a grace that, had anyone been paying attention, would have been remarkable to watch. She was not paying attention. What she was paying attention to was Noah, to the color in his face when he came down from his appointments, to the things the doctors said and the things she read at home afterward to understand them better, to the way he talked about his future with a certainty that she refused to let waver just because she was frightened. She was paying attention to the little girl, maybe 6 years old, who sat across from her one morning in late November and was clearly terrified, and whose parents had gone upstairs and had somehow not noticed that their daughter was alone, and so Margaret moved to the chair beside her and asked her what her favorite animal was, and they talked about penguins for 20 minutes until the parents came back. She was paying attention to the elderly man, a Mr. Kowalski, who sat near her every Wednesday and who had recently lost his wife of 49 years and who, she suspected, came to the hospital not because he had any particular medical need that day but because it was a place with people in it, and being among people was the closest thing to comfort he had found. She brought him coffee from her thermos. She asked about his wife's name, Eleanor, and she listened to him talk about Eleanor. And she asked good questions, and he left looking, every week, slightly less hollow than when he arrived. She was paying attention to Jamie, the young nurse, who one afternoon sat down beside her in the lobby during a break, an event that surprised both of them, and told her she was sorry for the way people here sometimes treated her, and Margaret had said, genuinely, "Don't apologize for other people's behavior, sweetheart. You're always kind to me." And Jamie had looked as though she might cry. None of this was strategy. It was simply how Margaret moved through the world. Attentive, present, oriented toward other people's distress as naturally as a plant turns toward light. The strategy, such as it was for Noah. And in December, the strategy came under serious strain. Dr. Pullman called Margaret into her office after Noah's appointment on a Thursday, while Noah waited outside. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses she wore on a chain, and she had a manner that Margaret had come to appreciate, direct without being cold, clear without being brutal. "Noah's condition has progressed faster than I'd hoped," she said. "The obstruction has increased significantly. I want to talk to you about surgical intervention." Margaret's hands were very still in her lap. "What kind of surgery?" Dr. Pullman explained. It was a procedure called a septal myectomy, the surgical removal of part of the thickened heart muscle. It was the most effective long-term treatment for Noah's condition. Meridian had an excellent surgical team. The success rates were high. "And the cost?" Margaret asked. Dr. Pullman told her. Margaret did not react. She was very practiced at not reacting in doctors' offices. She asked 2 more questions, wrote down the name of the procedure, thanked Dr. Pullman, and went out to where Noah was waiting. "Good news," he said. "Positive news," she said, which was almost the same thing. "Let's get lunch before the bus." "I saw a diner on the next block." She took him to the diner and she ordered soup and he ordered a sandwich, and they talked about his physics homework, and she listened and responded and asked questions and laughed at the right moments, and she did not think about the number Dr. Pullman had said until she was on the bus home and Noah had his earphones in and was looking out the window at the gray Chicago afternoon. Then she thought about it. She thought about what she had left in the savings account, which was almost nothing. She thought about the pension and the sewing work and what she could realistically increase. She thought about the bracelet and the pearls, which were gone. She thought about the pocket watch, and then she thought about the small oil painting of the lake that Thomas had loved, that hung in the living room, that she had been trying not to think about selling for over a year. She thought about all of it for the 90-minute bus ride home, and when they got off at their stop and Noah said he was going to study and she said good, she'd make dinner in an hour. She was very calm and very normal about all of it, and then she went to the bathroom and ran the water in the sink and stood over it for a while. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. She just wasn't sure, this time, how. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning in January, posted in the hospital lobby on a large printed notice beside the reception desk, and it said that Meridian was honored to announce a forthcoming visit from Dr. Ethan Carter, Director of Cardiac Innovation at Massachusetts General Hospital, internationally recognized pioneer in minimally invasive heart surgery, and the language got slightly breathless here, the man whose surgical technique had been adopted by cardiac centers in 14 countries and whose research had contributed to saving an estimated 30,000 lives in the past 2 decades. Margaret glanced at the notice as she passed it. She read the name. She felt something briefly, a flicker of recognition, faint and distant as a word you almost remember, and then dismissed it. Carter was not an uncommon name. She sat in her chair by the window and opened her book. The hospital had not talked about anything else for 2 weeks. The executives were in planning meetings daily. The director had ordered a thorough cleaning and repainting of the lobby, which Margaret had observed with quiet amusement, given that the lobby had been immaculate to begin with. There were new orchids on the reception desk, a slightly more elaborate arrangement than usual. The waterfall feature had been serviced. The parking area reserved for VIP guests had been repainted. Margaret gathered, from what she overheard, that Dr. Carter's endorsement of Meridian as a center of cardiac excellence would be enormously valuable, the kind of association that brought research funding in high-profile cases and the sort of donors who wrote checks with many zeros. She gathered that the director, Richard Graves, had spent considerable political capital arranging this visit and was counting on it quite heavily. She gathered that the head nurse, Sandra Holt, had been specifically instructed to Ensure that the lobby presented an image consistent with Meridian's brand identity as one of Chicago's premier medical institutions. She gathered this because Sandra Holt had told her so, directly, on the morning of the visit, while instructing her to leave. Margaret had been sitting in her chair since 6:30, as usual. She had her book, her thermos, the same gray coat. Noah's appointment was at 9, but she always came early. The buses were unpredictable in January and she had missed an appointment once in October, and the guilt of it had not left her. The lobby was being arranged around her, like water flowing around a stone. Extra chairs had been removed. A small podium had been set up near the far wall. 3 people she didn't recognize, who had the particular energy of PR professionals, were standing in a cluster near the window discussing something on a tablet. Sandra appeared at 8:45. Mrs. Collins. Her voice was crisp and final, the voice of someone who had prepared what they were going to say. I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the family area upstairs today. My hip, Margaret began. I understand, Sandra said, in a tone that made it clear she did not particularly, but we have a very significant event taking place this morning, and we cannot have. She paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone walking through a minefield. We cannot have the lobby looking like an unmanaged public space. From across the room, Preston Walsh and his colleagues were watching. Isn't that the 3rd time this month they've kicked her out? One of them said, not particularly quietly. She just doesn't get the hint, Preston said. He tilted his head. At least she keeps coming back. Very dedicated to the bit. Some of the nurses laughed. Jamie, who was walking past, didn't. Margaret stood. She was slow about it, her hip was genuinely bad in the cold, and Sandra watched her with that barely there impatience, and a handful of other people in the lobby watched too, some with something close to sympathy and some with the passive interest of people watching something minor unfold, and Margaret collected her things, and adjusted her bag on her arm, and said, I'm sorry to have caused any trouble, and turned toward the door. She had taken maybe 5 steps when the automatic doors opened, and the cold air rushed in for just a moment, and then Dr. Ethan Carter walked into the lobby of Meridian Private Hospital. He had taken 3 steps inside and stopped. Not because of Richard Graves, who was moving toward him with an outstretched hand and an expression of carefully calibrated warmth. Not because of the cameras or the PR people or the board members positioned near the podium. He stopped because he had seen something. Had seen someone, and for a moment his body appeared to make a decision. Entirely independently of whatever professional context he was standing in. He walked past Richard Graves. He walked across the lobby. He stopped in front of Margaret Collins, and his hands were shaking, and there were tears on his face, and the lobby of the finest private hospital in Chicago was so absolutely silent that you could hear, very faintly, the sound of the waterfall. I finally found you, he whispered. And he knelt. There are moments in life when the space around you changes. When the air pressure shifts and the light seems different and you become aware, suddenly and completely, that whatever was happening before this moment and whatever happens after it will be divided by this point in time, that this is a before and after, that everything you thought the day was going to be is no longer what the day is going to be. This was one of those moments for approximately 30 people. Margaret was looking at him and her face had done something that faces rarely do, which was to show several very different emotions in rapid succession: confusion, and then recognition fighting its way through the confusion, and then something much deeper and much older than either of those things, something that lived at the level where memory meets feeling. Ethan, she said softly, and it was not a question. He nodded. He was still on one knee and tears were running down his face without any particular effort to stop them, and he looked, in that moment, exactly like what he was a 17-year-old boy in a waiting room who had just been told his mother was going to be okay, and who was finally, 25 years later, able to say thank you. You saved my mother's life, he said. And you saved mine. And I have been looking for you since I was 23 years old. Behind him, the lobby was frozen. Richard Graves stood with his outstretched hand still slightly extended, his expression cycling through several phases that his face wasn't fully prepared for. Sandra Holt had her arms unfolded. Preston Walsh was completely still, and for once, he had nothing to say. Come, Margaret said gently, and touched Ethan's arm, and he stood. Let's sit down. My knee's not what it was either. They sat together in the chairs by the window, her chairs, as she had come to think of them, and around them the lobby very slowly, very carefully, began to breathe again. Ethan told her everything. He told her the way a man tells a story he has rehearsed many times in his imagination and is now discovering that the real version is both easier and harder than he expected. He told her about that night in February 25 years ago, about coming to the hospital alone because his mother had called him from work and he was the only one she could reach, about standing in that waiting room and knowing that something was very wrong and not knowing what to do. He told her about the blood, how the nurses had said they couldn't find a match, how the fear had built in him into something he had no language for at 17, how he had been sitting against the wall thinking thoughts he had never let himself think about since, and then this woman had appeared beside him and said, I think I might be able to help your mom. He told her about the hot chocolate. He said, I don't know if you know this, but I didn't eat that day. I was too scared. And when you came back with that hot chocolate, that was the first warm thing I'd had in about 12 hours, and I couldn't even say thank you properly because I was already, he stopped. I was already a mess. You were 17 and your mother was sick, Margaret said simply. You were supposed to be a mess. You told me I was going to be a doctor, he said. You said you didn't have the slightest doubt. I didn't. I had failed my chemistry midterm that semester, he said. I was failing chemistry. And my mother was in the hospital and my father had been gone for 8 years and I was sitting there thinking that maybe the whole idea of me being a doctor was just a story I'd told myself, that maybe, he paused. And then this woman who owed me absolutely nothing told me she was certain. Not like an encouragement thing. Like a fact. Like she actually knew. I did actually know, Margaret said. I know, he said. I know you did. He was quiet for a moment. I went home and I called the chemistry teacher and asked to retake the midterm. He said no. I studied anyway. I took the final and aced it. I got a B in the class. And I thought, he shook his head, almost smiling through the tears, I thought, if that woman can be that certain about a kid she met in an emergency waiting room, maybe I should be at least a little bit certain about myself. He went to college. He went to medical school. He went into cardiology, into surgery, into research. He built something that people wrote about in journals, something that had, as the lobby notice said, contributed to saving an estimated 30,000 lives. And through all of it, he had held on to the memory of that night in February, the woman in the waiting room, the hot chocolate, the bus fare, the certainty. When he was 23, he had tried to find her. He had gone back to Cook County Hospital and spoken to everyone still there who might remember, and someone had said there had been a woman, AB negative, had donated blood and then stayed with the boy, but no one had a full name, only a first name, Margaret, and even that wasn't certain. He'd had no address, no phone number, nothing. He had never stopped looking. Not because he was obsessive about it, He was fundamentally a practical man, but because he had told his mother about her, and his mother had said, "Ethan, if you ever find her, I want to thank her myself." And his mother had died 8 years ago, and before she died, she had made him promise to keep looking. He was telling Margaret this when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and then looked up with an expression of slight alarm. "That's Noah," she said. "He's done. Upstairs." She stood, and then seemed to realize the strangeness of the moment. That she was about to excuse herself from what was, objectively, one of the most significant conversations of her life to go collect her grandson. "I'm sorry, I need go," Ethan said immediately, standing with her. "But don't leave. Please." She went. She crossed the lobby, and as she went, several things happened simultaneously. Richard Graves approached Ethan and began saying something about schedules and the planned presentation, and Ethan said, not unkindly but very clearly, "That can wait," and went on watching the spot where Margaret had disappeared into the elevator. And around the lobby, in small clusters, the reckonings were beginning. Jamie, the young nurse, was standing against the wall with her hands clasped and her eyes very bright, watching one of the nurses who had laughed at Preston Walsh's joke that morning was looking at the floor. Sandra Holt was standing beside the reception desk with an expression on her face that Margaret, had she seen it, might have felt sorry for. It was the expression of someone who is understanding, with perfect clarity and no way to undo it, exactly what they have done. Preston Walsh said nothing. He looked at Ethan Carter, who was standing in the middle of the lobby waiting for an old woman to come back with her grandson, and he said nothing at all. Noah came into the lobby at 9:23, his backpack over one shoulder, and stopped when he saw his grandmother standing next to a man he didn't know who appeared to have been recently crying. "Grandma," he said carefully, "is everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. Without any effort at all. She introduced them. Ethan shook Noah's hand and looked at him with the particular attention of a heart surgeon seeing a patient for the first time, and then with something else, something that wasn't clinical at all, a kind of recognition, not of Noah specifically but of the whole shape of the situation, who this boy was and what he represented and what it meant that Margaret was here, in this lobby, every day. "Your grandmother," Ethan said, "is one of the most important people I have ever met." Noah looked at his grandmother. Margaret looked slightly embarrassed. "Don't listen to him," she said. "He's being dramatic." "I'm being accurate," Ethan said. They sat, all three of them, and Margaret told Noah the story, the real version, the full version, which she had never told him before because it had never seemed like the kind of story that needed to be told. It was simply something that had happened. And then it was over. She told him about that night in February, about the waiting room and the blood and the hot chocolate and the bus fare. She told it simply, without embellishment, the way she told most things. Noah was very quiet through all of it. He was quiet the way he got when something had taken him by surprise in a way that he needed time to organize around. When she was done, he looked at Ethan and said, "She never mentioned any of this." "No," Ethan said. "She didn't leave her name, actually. I spent 25 years trying to find her." Noah processed this. "Why didn't you leave your name?" he asked his grandmother. "There didn't seem to be a reason to," she said. "She didn't do it for credit," Ethan said. "She did it because it needed to be done and she could do it. That's just who she is." He paused. "I've met a lot of people in my life. I don't know many people like her." And then, because Ethan Carter was a man who believed in directness, who had learned that dancing around important things accomplished nothing, he said, "I'd like to know about Noah's condition. If that's all right. Margaret hesitated. This was the part she kept close, the part she didn't share with people, because sharing it made it more real and she had enough real to manage already. But she looked at Ethan Carter, and she thought about that night in February 25 years ago, and she thought about what certainty offered to a frightened person can mean, and she said, all right. She told him everything. Dr. Pullman. The septal myectomy. The cost. She said the last part quietly, without drama, the way she said all difficult things. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I want to review his file. With your permission and Dr. Pullman's, I'd like to assess whether I can be involved in his surgical team. I won't promise anything until I've seen everything, but, he paused. I want to help. You don't have to, Margaret began. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. There's a difference. He looked at her steadily. You told me, once, that you were certain about my future. I'd like to return the certainty. The lobby was still quietly watching all of this. The PR coordinator had put her tablet down. Richard Graves had not moved in several minutes. Sandra Holt had left. Margaret noticed her absence and felt something that was not quite satisfaction but was in the neighborhood of it, a sense that certain things had a way of settling themselves. What happened over the next several hours would, in the days and weeks that followed, be referred to by the staff of Meridian Private Hospital simply as the day. As in, before the day, and after the day, as if it constituted enough of a dividing line that no further specification was needed. Ethan met with Dr. Pullman. He reviewed Noah's complete file, the echocardiograms, the medication history, the progression data, and he sat with Dr. Pullman in her office for nearly an hour, and what came out of that conversation was a surgical plan that was somewhat more refined than the one originally discussed, a modification to the standard approach that Ethan had developed and published on 3 years earlier and that had shown significantly better outcomes in Noah's specific presentation. He also made a call to his administrative team in Boston and arranged for the surgery costs to be covered through a foundation he had established 6 years earlier, specifically to fund cardiac procedures for patients who couldn't afford them. He told Margaret this matter-of-factly, the way he told her most things. She said no. Margaret. I appreciate it, she said. I appreciate it more than you can imagine. But I didn't help you that night expecting anything in return, and I'm not going to. This isn't a transaction, he said. It's not you getting paid back. This is a 15-year-old boy who wants to be a heart surgeon and who has a grandmother who has given every single thing she has to keep him alive, and who deserves to actually live. He was quiet for a moment. Letting Noah have this surgery is the greatest way you can honor what you did for me. Please. She was silent for a long time. Outside the lobby window, Chicago was gray and cold, and going about its business. Please, he said again, more quietly. All right, she said. Thank you. The word cost her something. She was not a person who found accepting help easy. But she said it fully, without qualification, and he nodded. The board meeting was called that afternoon. Richard Graves delivered a summary of what had occurred that morning to the assembled board members, 3 of whom had been present in the lobby and 2 of whom had heard about it within hours through the particular velocity that significant hospital gossip achieves. The summary was accurate but notably lacking in the word humiliation, which was the word most people would have used to describe what had happened to the director's management style that morning. The board did not use that word either, but they understood it. The outcome was that Richard Graves was asked to step down from the directorship, a request framed as a Mutual decision and accompanied by language about leadership transitions and new directions. He accepted it with the expression of a man who had known it was coming. Sandra Holt was suspended for 30 days. She was told that the suspension would be noted in her file and that her return to work would be conditional on completed training in patient dignity and implicit bias, a phrase she received with a very controlled expression that gave very little away. Preston Walsh stood in front of the colleagues he had made laugh, in a hallway, and apologized. It was not a short apology and it was not a comfortable one, and he did not look like himself doing it, which several people who were present noted privately was probably the most honest he had looked in years. Jamie, who was not present for the apology but heard about it from two separate sources before end of shift, felt something a knot in her chest that she hadn't realized was knotted. Margaret accepted every apology that was offered to her with grace, because grace was not something she performed, it was simply how she was built. When Sandra Holt came to her, on Sandra's last day before suspension, with an expression that was clearly costing her a great deal, and said, "I was wrong about how I treated you, and I'm sorry," Margaret took her hand and said, "I know you are, dear." Not as a dismissal. As an acknowledgement. Ethan, watching from across the room, said later that it was, for him, the single most remarkable thing he had seen in his career, which was saying something. Noah's surgery was scheduled for February, the same month, 25 years later, as that night in the waiting room at Cook County. Neither Margaret nor Ethan pointed this out when they noticed it, but they both noticed it. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Margaret sat in the family waiting area on the second floor, the one with the chairs that hurt her hip, and she sat in those chairs without complaining for all 6 hours because this was the waiting that mattered and she would have sat on concrete for it. Ethan was in the surgical suite. Dr. Pullman had offered to keep Margaret company and did for 3 of the 6 hours, and then Jamie appeared on her break and sat with her for another hour without being asked, and for the last 2 hours she sat alone with her book and her thermos and the particular stillness she had always had. When Ethan came through the doors in his surgical scrubs, still wearing his mask pulled down, and said, "It went perfectly," she did not collapse or cry or say anything dramatic. She closed her book. She breathed in and breathed out. She said, "Thank you," in a voice that carried the weight of everything she had not said in the past 2 years. Then she allowed herself, privately, to feel how terrified she had been, and she sat with that feeling for about 3 minutes, and then she put it away, because Noah was going to be fine, and there was nothing left to be afraid of. He woke up the following morning, groggy and annoyed by the tubes, and the first thing he said was, "Did it work?" And Margaret said, "It worked," and he said, "Okay. Good," and went back to sleep. Recovery took time, the way real things take time. Noah was in the hospital for 10 days. Margaret was there every day, in her chair by the window, reading her book and drinking her coffee and talking to frightened children and lonely elderly patients and exhausted families, because that was simply what she did when she was in a hospital and there were people who needed someone to talk to. No one asked her to leave. No one questioned what she was doing there. Dennis, the security guard, who had always liked her and had always been somewhat uncomfortable with the other thing, brought her a cup of coffee from the staff break room one morning and said nothing except, "Morning, Mrs. Collins," and she said, "Good morning, Dennis," and that was enough. Dr. Pullman cleared Noah for light activity at 4 weeks and school at 6 weeks. With restrictions. He went back to school on a cold Monday morning in March and came home that afternoon having apparently explained to his entire biology class, in considerable detail, exactly what a septal myectomy involved, which his teacher had described in an email to Margaret as unexpectedly thorough. Ethan came back to Chicago in March, and again in April, partly for professional reasons and partly, as became clear to everyone who observed it, because he had found what he'd been looking for and had no intention of simply filing it away. He had dinner with Margaret and Noah. He came to Noah's first follow-up appointment. He sat at Margaret's kitchen table drinking the coffee she made, which was strong enough to sustain him through whatever the morning required, and talked about cardiology with Noah for 2 hours while Margaret sewed in the next room and listened to them through the open doorway. He told Noah about his own path, the chemistry midterm, the medical school rejections, the residency years, the long road between 17 and 51. He told him without sugarcoating, because Noah was the kind of person who needed the real version and would know immediately if he was getting a simplified one. He said, "There will be years when you doubt everything. That's not a sign you chose wrong. It's a sign you're paying attention." Noah listened to all of it with that focused, intense attention he had, taking notes in his head, filing it away. By May, Noah was the same physically but different in some way that was harder to describe, more settled, maybe. As though something that had been uncertain had resolved itself, not just his health, but something about the shape of his future, which had always been there as a dream and was now beginning to look more like a plan. He got a summer job at a hospital, administrative work, filing, reception backup, the kind of thing that didn't require credentials but put him in proximity to the world he intended to join. He came home every day with observations and questions, and Margaret answered what she could and forwarded the rest to Ethan by text message. A mode of communication she had taken to with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything. The hospital had changed. Not overnight, institutional culture doesn't change overnight, but in the months after what the staff continued to call the day, there were discernible differences. The new director, a woman named Dr. Carla Washington, who had come from Cook County, where she had spent 15 years building a department explicitly committed to equitable patient experience, had made the hospital's treatment of all people in the building one of her first and loudest priorities. Training sessions were held. Conversations were had. Some people found the conversations uncomfortable and some found them overdue, and both things were probably true. Jamie was promoted to charge nurse. It was a promotion she'd been eligible for some time, and which had somehow not happened, and it happened now, and she took it with a quiet satisfaction that had some relationship to everything that had occurred in January. In October, Meridian held a small ceremony, not public, not for cameras, just for staff and a few invited guests, in which they formally named the family waiting area on the second floor after Thomas Collins, at Margaret's request that the honor go to her late husband because, she said, he was the one who made sure I knew my blood type. There were people in that room who had to excuse themselves briefly. Afterward, Margaret took Noah to the ceremony, and Ethan flew in for it, and Rose came from Seattle, which she hadn't done in 2 years, and they all had dinner together. Afterward at a restaurant that was nicer than anywhere Margaret normally went, and she wore a dress that Claire had given her years ago that she had been saving for an occasion that turned out to be this one. The last time Margaret Collins walked into the lobby of Meridian Private Hospital that year, it was a Tuesday in December. She was wearing her gray coat, because it was cold and it was a good coat, and she had her bag on her arm and Noah was beside her, 16 now and 4 inches taller than he'd been in January, and they were there for his 6-month follow-up. She came through the automatic doors and the lobby was busy, the way it always was on Tuesday mornings, and it was warm and the orchids were on the reception desk. And the waterfall was doing its thing, and she walked in and something happened that she noticed without quite being able to process it in the moment. People looked up. And they didn't look away. The nurses at the desk nodded. Dennis, at his post near the entrance, smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Collins," the way he always said it now. A doctor she recognized from the cardiology floor caught her eye and inclined his head. Jamie was crossing the lobby in the other direction and stopped to say hello and to ask Noah how he was feeling. And somewhere near the back of the lobby, in a corridor that opened onto the administrative wing, Ethan Carter was standing. He had come for a meeting, was leaving in the afternoon, and he saw her come in. He watched her cross the lobby. He watched the way people acknowledged her, and the way she acknowledged them back, warmly, without any trace of the wariness she'd had in January, and he felt something in his chest that was not clinical and was not professional and was not anything he had a precise medical term for, though he suspected it was the kind of thing poets tried to describe. She was smiling. Noah had her arm. She moved through the lobby as if she belonged there, which she did, which she had always done, which the lobby had simply failed to understand until now. She didn't notice Ethan watching. She was talking to Noah, saying something that made him laugh, a real laugh, the full one he'd had since he was small, and they went toward the elevator, and the doors opened, and they stepped inside. Ethan stood in the corridor for a moment after the elevator doors closed. He thought about a night in February 25 years ago. He thought about hot chocolate and bus fare and a woman who had told a frightened boy that she was certain about his future. He thought about how a single act of kindness, small enough that the person offering it didn't even think to leave her name, had become 30,000 lives saved, and a foundation that paid for surgeries that people couldn't afford, and a 16-year-old boy who wanted to be a heart surgeon and now had the heart to prove it. He straightened his jacket. He had a meeting to get to. Sometimes the quietest souls carry the greatest miracles, and the world only recognizes them after kindness changes everything.